You have wisely tuned in to another episode of Roscoe Gadsden's High Capacity Online Gun Magazine. Hello, I'm Roscoe Gadsden.
I'm Rod.
And we're going to talk about this little idea we had. Go ahead, Rod.
Well, we had a kind of an idea that what if during World War I, instead of issuing the 1903 Springfield, the U.S. had instead adopted the 1907 Winchester self-loading rifle. Springfield being in 30-06 and the Winchester being in 351 WSL. Once you handle and shoot both of these, it kind of becomes less of a what if and sort of a why not.
Yeah.
It's a lot handier, semi-automatic, magazine fed. Granted, it's not 30-06, but it's still potent enough. This is the 351 WSL is used by hunters even today, and
yeah, like us.
right, yeah, like us,
Yeah.
and was used by hard men on both sides of the law in the gangster era. Was it not?
Very, very popular.
Who was it?
Hyman Lebman.
Hyman Lebman.
Yeah. If you look at, I think a good example is Public Enemies. You'll see this gun show up a couple of times with a Thompson foregrip and a muzzle brake of some sort on it. Our idea here of using this gun in World War I, it's not exactly an original idea. I mean, we had the idea, and then when we started looking into it, we find out it wasn't our idea. The French actually used this in World War I, mostly for air-to-air combat, as it seems, just going by what I've read about it.
Right. We're kind of taking a more of in the hands of an infantryman approach.
Yeah,
though.
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, we think that's where it would really shine compared to that big mother right there, which I love that rifle. But man, for rapidity of fire and magazine capacity, this has it beat really, really hands down. It also wasn't our idea. If you look at some pre-World War II requests that the government put out, hey, gun people, make us a carbine that's light and fast and handy. And that resulted in the M1 carbine, but one of the submissions was the wood hull, which was based on one of these. And you can look that up. I mean, it's obviously just basically this gun has a giant forend on it. Looks like the forend off a BAR. When we started looking around at other material that was out there on this subject, we found a guy, and I think it's called Backyard Battlefield, imagining the use of the 351 in World War I, and I thought that was a pretty good video. We're just going into a little more technical depth, I think. I mean, not to take anything away from that video. If there are any voids in that one, we're going to attempt to fill them. So, what's good about the 351? First, I want to talk about what's bad about it. It's fast and easy handling, but it is very dense. This rifle right here weighs as much as our Mauser K98, and the Springfield that we're proposing replacing with this, they all weigh about the same, 8 pounds, 8.2, something in there. For our shooting portion, we're imagining the 351 WSL model 1907 Winchester against the Mauser 8mm. But standing in for a G98?
Right,
Yeah.
which would have been the rifle, which is I think another 4 inches and probably
Yeah,
another.
this is a K98, K for carabiner, which did not exist in World War I. When you see us shooting this Mauser, you have to imagine it being another 4 inches long and maybe a pound heavier, right? I'm not sure. But part of the density on this gun comes from the fact that it is straight blowback. That means there's no locking bolt, there's no tilting bolt. It is straight blowback like a 22, like a Ruger 1022. So how do you take a cartridge this powerful, which not saying it's super powerful, it's not as powerful as these.
Right, but it's not a 22.
It's not a 22, it's a pretty significant cartridge, 1,350 foot-pounds of energy. How do you make that straight blowback? The bolt weighs a lot. When I first discovered that these were straight blowback, I was shocked. I first got this and I'm like, how does it lock? I don't see anything locking anywhere. It's straight blowback by means of a very, very heavy bolt. That bolt is so heavy that I was concerned that the first time I took the bolt out of the gun, I wouldn't be able to lift it. But as it turns out, It weighs 2.5 pounds. So, it's really not that bad, but that's a lot of weight for a bolt. If we compare that to, an AR-15, an AR-15 bolt, 5.56, the bolt weighs about 5 ounces. But we really have to count, if we're gonna compare apples to apples, we have to count the bolt carrier and the buffer, and that comes to 11 ounces. So, well under a pound, about 2/3 of a pound on an AR-15, 2.5 pounds on this, because there's no mechanical locking. And that 5.56 is a cartridge that runs at about 50% higher chamber pressure. So this, I would say that 351 WSL cartridge, it's not the limit. It's not the limit for straight blowback. But,
Well, there's
I
no
mean,
limit, I suppose.
there's no limit, because we found
The 20 millimeter Ehrlichen anti-aircraft cannon is
is straight blowback.
essentially straight blowback.
That bolt, I'd like to get the weight on that bolt. Another disadvantage for this, I mean, in its current commercial configuration, is the fore end, because we have all this reciprocating weight. Where does the bolt get its weight? It's all one piece. The bolt is back here, and then it extends forward, and it's a super beefy chunk of steel underneath here. So to make room for that, the fore end is rather thin. You won't find many of these rifles where the fore end isn't cracked. This one's been repaired once by me and probably by somebody 50 years ago. This model 1907 here was made in 1908. So it's been around a long, long time and probably had a lot of rounds through it. Accuracy on it is still fine. So that walnut fore end is part of the problem. And I'm imagining in a just prior to World War I situation, let's just make it out of Bakelite, which coincidentally was invented or first came out in 1907. Or it could be a sheet metal framework with some wood chunks on it or something like that. The wood,
Or just beef it up like that wood hull rifle.
that wood hull I mentioned, they just put more wood. So the fore end on that one is like this big.
Yeah.
It's too big to crack. So it has some advantages though too. Go ahead.
It's semi-automatic. It's got a more sealed action for sure. I mean, take your 1903 and it's open. And the same with the Mauser. But really all you have on this rifle with a magazine in it is the little ejection port. An M16 style dust cover on that, although
That'd be awesome.
that would increase the price and all that.
Yeah.
It doesn't have a charging handle. Instead, this rifle comes with a plunger
That's
up
one of my
front.
favorite parts right
Yeah,
there.
that's pretty neat. And which you can use to lock the bolt open. This is a takedown too.
Is this good for maintenance in a trench in World War I? It might be.
Doesn't hurt, I suppose.
Yeah, my point about that is, it's harder to take down, well, that is the takedown. Getting the bolt out, forget about it.
Never happened.
No.
But do you really have to get the bolt out?
Yeah, I mean.
Not necessarily. It's
Where's the mud going in?
kind of like just
Right
a
there.
straight blowback too. There's no grooves or anything for it to get into.
Right, yeah, there's no locking stuff to be fouled up. But with that little ejection port there, and with the bolt closed, there's nothing getting in there.
No.
Compared to the bolt action, which has, well, that much space on top, even with the bolt closed, everything's out in the open.
Right.
Let alone if you stumble in your trench.
Yeah, two-thirds of the bolt is exposed,
Yeah.
even with it closed. Now, back to caliber a little, the 351, I would argue was certainly potent enough, but some might disagree, and I suppose if you were trying to sell this to the Army Board, you might have to talk them into it, but then again, they were talked into the Pedersen device, which in 30 Pedersen is like, what, 32 ACP
Magnum.
Magnum, right.
Yeah.
Hardly a potent cartridge.
Yeah, that's a good point. If you don't think this is, granted, this is much less potent than 30-06. I think by like 75%.
Right.
And if you say that's not good enough, then the Pedersen device, which was it was a doodad they made. You would take the bolt out of your .6, put the Pedersen device in. It had a 40-round magazine up here, and they decided that would be a good thing for when you're assaulting a trench. You can just pop, fire it from the hip. Is kind of what the intent was, and that was a very weak cartridge.
Right. Now, that does have the benefit, of course, that it functions on the 1903, and you still have a 30-06 rifles, so ammo compatibility is still a thing with machine guns. And that's something that would be a hard sell with this
Yeah,
is, well,
yeah.
your rifle is a .351, your machine gun is still a 30-06. You're sitting in the trench, minding your own business, and 5 Germans jump in with broom handle Mausers, stocks on it. It's a 10-round semi-automatic. It's a pistol, but it's like a pseudo carbine with the stock on it. What advantages does the .351 provide you over the bolt action Springfield? Quite a few, really. If you've got the 10-round magazine, you simply have a lot more firepower.
If you're going up against 5 guys with this, using that, you're at a distinct advantage. Now, unless you can get the lineup. Our friend Felipe always talks about the lineup when you're shooting prairie dogs.
Yeah,
You put one
that's
behind
right.
the other, and with 30-06, if you could line up 5 guys,
Probably get 3 of them.
Yeah, yeah. So let's reverse the scenario. It's you dropping into their trench. Do you want a 5-shot 30-06? Well, let's talk real quick about, is it a 5-shot or a 6-shot?
Well, it's a 5-shot that can be, you could Barney load it.
You can like trick it into being a
Yeah.
6-shot. We found it easier with the Mauser, right?
We found it easier with the Springfield because it's got the magazine cut off.
Oh, okay.
And
Yeah.
it's not really practical like with a pistol or an AR where you can just put a mag in, drop it, put another mag in. But you can do it. It can be done, and it works.
So how did we wind up doing it? We put 5 in the magazine.
Right. Engage the magazine cutoff.
Uh-huh.
Drop around in the chamber. Close it.
Yeah.
Disengage the magazine cutoff. You don't have to use magazine cutoff.
And we
but it
wondered
helps.
if that was bad for it, but that's the way the magazine cutoff was meant to be used.
Yeah.
The Mauser didn't have it, even though this is basically a copy of the Mauser.
We paid royalties to the Germans after World War I
Because
that
we
were
copied.
due because we had been copying their design in the 1903.
Yeah. So getting back to, we're dropping into their trench.
Right.
They all have Mausers, let's say. I mean, it's our scenario. We
Sure.
Make it easy on us
Yeah.
if we want. You and your 5 guys are dropping in with this thing, with 10 plus 1 in it, which we definitely can do that. 10 in the magazine, 1 in the chamber. You guys can dump 55 rounds. You, me, and our guys can dump 55 rounds in the next 6 to 8 to 10 seconds, and I don't see that not going our way.
Right.
Meanwhile, the guys in their trench with the Mauser, they're trying to fight us off with this thing. I think, advantage Winchester. So what about long distance? We look at all these World War I era weapons, and they all have sights graduated out to, in this case, I think this one goes out to 2,000 yards. All right, 2,000 yards, that's way out there. How much did that really happen? Of course, we don't know. I mean,
Right.
it's probably in the record somewhere, but they all had that, even that
this
broom
thing-
handle Mauser.
This one has them graduated out to 1,000 meters.
Yeah, good luck.
Yeah, good luck.
Good luck, especially with that one.
Yeah.
Bullets come out sideways because the barrel is rusted out on that one. But we wanted to know what you might be able to do with this thing at 500 yards. Let's say, the Ordnance Board and Ordnance Department and Infantry Board, the old sticks in the mud, they're going to insist on, we need to,
Yeah.
shoot way out there. So we did shoot this at 500 yards. Trying to somewhat come into alignment with the doctrine of that time, which was we have to shoot at distance. We have to this one's graduated out to 2,000 yards. Man, that's a long distance. You can't see people out there. You could see troop movement, and I think that's what's called H&I fire, harassment and interdiction. We're just gonna,
All 20 of us set your sights to
Yeah.
1,900 yards and then
we're gonna
aim at the
just
trees over there.
pester them, might get lucky and hit something. But it seems like, I'm not a World War I historian, but it seems like what I have read, it was like a lot closer than that. Trench warfare. The trenches were not that far apart all the time.
Right.
I'm sure it varied quite a bit.
From hand grenade distance to 300-400 yards.
Yeah.
Is what I have heard is the general distance.
Yeah. So all 3 of our shooting scenarios pit this against this. I think we've made it clear that our opinion is this is better at close range. What about 500 yards? Ran a ballistic program on the 351 WSL, which is the factory load was 180 grain, could be a soft point or an FMJ, going about 1,850 feet per second. So that might not sound like much compared to 8mm Mauser, but compared to 357 Magnum, which we consider adequate for a lot of things, especially at distances inside a trench. And this has a lot more juice than a 357 Magnum.
Well, wasn't it something like at 500 yards, this rifle is equivalent to a 9mm
Yeah,
point blank?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Kind of roughly, yes,
pretty
very
good.
much so. When we shot at 500 yards, and a lot of the shooting we did with this using hand loads, we used a cast, gas-checked, 180 grain round nose, going about 1790. So a little bit less than the factory loading, because I want to be kind of gentle on this whole thing. We ran a program on it, and we found that the drop at 500 yards would be about, any guesses? Like 19, 20 feet, maybe even a little bit more. We made a temporary rear peep sight for it with just a piece of Kydex that got contact cemented and Gorilla tape strapped on. It was bent up here, showing you a picture of it, with a little peephole in it, so that you could get the elevation for 500 yards. As you'll see in that segment, it wasn't that bad. It's not as flat shooting as the 8mm Mauser, that's for sure. But the question then becomes, well, can you hold can you hold a man-sized group at 500 yards? Yes. You just have to know where to hold it. So we're envisioning for World War I service, this would have a tangent sight on it, pretty much like these other guns, maybe a few other things we'll talk about at the end. Getting the ammo for it, I just saw a case of 2,000 rounds for sale on GB. The bidding was starting at $6,000, an unopened case about this big. Most interesting thing, the most interesting thing about it still had the address stamped on it, Bogota. And so somebody in Bogota was using these, police maybe,
Right.
bad guys maybe, I don't know.
For the 8mm Mauser, ammo's easy enough to find. There's a lot of new stuff out there, PPU.
And I think
who else
Federal
was
and
it? Federal?
Winchester are loading it.
It gets rather expensive though, and in our video we used Turkish 1944 surplus.
It was pretty good.
It was pretty okay. Some of I've had a few hang fires with it. Some of it's pretty flashy and loud, and some of it's not. But it works pretty well. It was relatively cheap.
So where to get ammo for this? I mentioned that I'm hand loading for it, and that is not such a bad way to go. It's not that hard. I mean, you're not going to shoot thousands of rounds through this, probably. I mean, if I could, I guess I would. But I did a little research. I got some help from a couple of old timers. There's a guy named Leonard Specken, a former Michigan State police trooper that kind of wrote the book on this gun. I got some advice from him, and I find that I can take, and this is what other guys do, you take 357 maximum brass, not magnum, but maximum. You cut it to length, and you can also do it with 360 Dan Wesson, same process. Cut it to the right length, you turn the rim down and deepen the extractor groove, and poof, you've got brass. So if you do that 100 times, I mean, that's about how many times I've done it, you have enough ammo for, some research and some fun and some deer hunting. The funny thing about the caliber 351 Winchester self-loading is it takes a bullet that's .351. So using bullets for 9mm or 357 Magnum, that's kind of out unless you want to push them through a sizing die, which I've been doing. Cast bullets aren't hard to find. Jacketed soft points are available from a place called Hawk, and they look just like the original loading. And I haven't shot a deer with one, but I've shot some ballistic gel with them, and I thought they did just fine. What I've been doing is taking the 170 grain Hornady bullet intended for the 350 Legend. I made a little die I can push them through, size them down to actually 352, and I've been using those. It's a 170 grain interlock, 355 diameter, size it down to 352. It has a little bit of a point on it, so I'm thinking that if we could have shot that round at 500 yards, probably the drop would be less than 19 feet, but we wanted to kind of keep it real, mimicking the original factory load shape. If we could go back, and make a proposal to Uncle Sam. Uncle Sam, you gotta check this thing out.
Right.
This is gonna be great. This is what our guys should, if there's gonna be war in Europe, we should give our guys this gun. They can shoot a lot more and more faster.
I think your main problem there is gonna be cost and logistical tie-ups related with having 351 and 30-06 on the same battlefield, because, you know, they're still gonna want the belt feds in 30-06
Yeah.
and the Shawshats in 30-06.
Yeah.
And so if you really just try and sell them on the Winchester self-loader
As is.
as is,
Yeah.
it's gonna have to be pretty darn cheap. And this rifle was it $26 per
I think
gun?
so, yeah.
Was the cost in 1907?
It really, as far as I can find, it tracked really closely to this gun from 1910 on up to World War II. I mean, of course, they cost more and more and more, but
Right.
they were pretty equal. I would go to Mr. Browning and say, please, Mr. Browning, we're sorry about that whole business of like working around your patents and everything, but could you come up with a handy dandy, inexpensive way to make this a locked breech gun so we don't have to have all that?
Or like a delayed,
Yeah, something.
I mean,
And
ideally roller delayed, that
Yeah.
didn't really, I don't think that was a thing back then.
you know,
One can hope, one can wish.
but to propose it to the
tilting
government in the year, let's say 1910,
Right.
well, I would do that. I would add a dust cover. One very important thing, I don't think this cartridge will be too hamstrung if we take 4 inches off the barrel. And then I would wire Mr. Maxim and say, hey, you wanna make some silencers? Maybe 150,000 of them for us? I bet he'd say yes. This thing with a silencer on it, it wouldn't even have to be the most efficient silencer in the world, but I think that would be an advantage.
I think those improvements, while certainly increasing the effectiveness of the rifle, the cost is gonna be a really hard sell.
I'm thinking they might insist that it be 30 caliber. So just imagine with me now, take this cartridge, this 351 WSL, which some people make cases out of 5.56 for it. I don't think that's good practice, but, so take the 351 WSL, neck it down to 30 caliber, and while we're at it, let's take the rim off it, make it rimless. We know now, they were still finding their way back then, but we know now that's
Rimless
better for
is-
semi-auto.
yeah.
For economy and logistics, let it use the 150 grain bullet that's being used in the 30-06 at the time. And what does that look like? It looks very, very familiar. Looks like a 300 Whisper. Okay, 300 Blackout if you, and the final thing, the final thing, I think could be very conducive here would be, let's make it a double stack magazine. I mean, that's a 10 rounder. So it's a single stack, so it has to be pretty long. What if we made a double stack magazine? Well, did they have double stack magazines back there?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah.
The Savage Model 1907.
Yep, and that wasn't the only one. I mean, that's a double stack magazine, but it's not detachable.
Right.
The Browning
But they made them
BAR.
detachable
yeah.
at some point.
Yeah, the Browning,
And it should be noted also that 1907 Savage and 32 ACP, well, 32 ACP is also a semi-rimless cartridge.
yeah, straight
So-
walled, semi-rim.
Yep.
Yeah. So it works in 10 shots quick was their advertisement. Well, we're imagining things here with the benefit of a century of
Hindsight.
hindsight, and, additional technology coming along. And it's a little bit of a flight of fantasy. It doesn't really,
I mean,
we're not talking about how much does it cost, because we're pretending it doesn't matter.
Right.
But as you have said, it probably would have.
yeah, it certainly would have. And I suppose with hindsight, well, what they should have done was tooled up and started making M16s, but,
Yeah, right.
you can't.
Yeah.
You can only
But-
play the game so much.
So these were about the same cost as that at that time. Now, the Maxim silencer, I mean, I think those were like $7 in that day. Cost is always a factor in government
absolutely.
procurement, even though it doesn't feel like it to the taxpayer, it is.